Welcome to the America 250 PA Start Here, America Did podcast, telling the unique stories that make up the diverse fabric of Pennsylvania.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Start Here, America Did, the America 250 PA podcast. My name is Sydney Harris-White, and I am your host. 250 years. This is it. This is the moment. The 4th of July is just around the corner, and here at America 250 PA, we have spent the last 8 years working toward this historic occasion. But from the very beginning, this commemoration has never been about one city, one event, or one moment in time. It has been about all of Pennsylvania. Across all 67 counties, America 250 PA has worked to make sure Pennsylvanians from every corner of the Commonwealth have had a place in this story. Through Lecture 250 series, classroom visits, Liberty Trees, custom bells, PA Day, the Countdown to 250 mobile experiential unit sponsored by Penske, the Commonwealth Concert Series, this year's county kickoffs across Pennsylvania, and so much more. This anniversary has been built to include all Pennsylvanians in the celebration of our nation's 250th birthday. Whether you have joined us at an event, attended a county kickoff, followed along online, listened to this podcast from the beginning, or just tuning in today, you can feel how big this moment is. This is a once-in-a-generation commemoration for Pennsylvania and for the nation. And for this 4th of July episode, we wanted to bring the story back to one of the places that helps us understand what independence truly required. When we celebrate Independence Day, we often think of Philadelphia in 1776, the Declaration of Independence, and those bold words that helped launch a nation. But the story of independence did not end with signatures on a page. It continued in the lives of the people who carried forward that promise. That brings us to Valley Forge. Valley Forge was not the site of a major battle, but it became one of the most powerful places in the story of the American Revolution. It is where hardship, perseverance, leadership, and belief in the cause of independence all came together. Today, we are joined by the Valley Forge Park Alliance to talk about the real story of Valley Forge, the people connected to it, the history that continues to inspire visitors, and the work being done today to preserve and share this extraordinary Pennsylvania landmark. Because, as we celebrate 250 years, Valley Forge reminds us that independence was not just declared, it was carried forward. Let's get started. I am honored to be joined by Molly Duffy, Executive Director of the Valley Forge Park Alliance, and Don Naimoli, VFPA's Chair Emeritus. Molly and Don, thank you both so much for joining us for today's episode as we honor and commemorate the founding of our nation by talking about the people, perseverance, and place that helped carry the promise of independence forward.
Thank you so much for having us. We're really glad to be talking about Valley Forge as we look forward to July 4th.
Yes, and we're really happy to be here to share this great place with your listeners.
To start, Molly and Don, can you introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your roles with the Valley Forge Park Alliance?
I have been the executive director of the Valley Forge Park Alliance for almost 10 years now. And for most of that has been part-time. And in the last few years, it has become a full-time position as our organization is really growing and we have added staff. And we are far different from the all-volunteer organization that was founded 50 years ago when Valley Forge became a national park, and we became its official friends group. And Don wasn't here quite in 1976, but he did join the Valley Forge Park Alliance long before I did.
Yeah, I've been a volunteer at Valley Forge for 38 years now, going back to 1988. I served on boards, and I'm currently a member of the board of the Valley Forge Park Alliance. I served as its chairman from 2007 until a few years ago. And that's when I became emeritus. Time marches on, you get old. And I often think of the principle that you rise to your level of incompetence. And I did what I could while I was chair, but I recognized that the organization was going far beyond my level of competence. And that's when Molly came in, and she carried it from that point forward, and she's done a fantastic job. I love Valley Forge. I love the Alliance, and I love getting more people involved, particularly the communities that surround Valley Forge. They need to know what they have in their very backyard, and that's a lot of what we're about.
Don is very humble. Valley Forge Park Alliance, we are the citizen stewards of Valley Forge Park. And Don is one of the strongest citizen stewards we've ever had. And he has a really good story about his interest in Valley Forge when he was a teenager and he had just started driving. So I'm going to let him tell that quickly.
Oh, geez. I grew up in South Philadelphia, and I spent a lot of time around Independence Hall. I was just enamored with the history of our country from when I was very young. Not sure why, but it just amazed me that we lived right where all those stories took place. And when I turned 16 and got my driver's license, my very first solo drive, I took my mother's car and drove up the expressway to Valley Forge and drove around. It was a state park then. And when my mother found out that I had done that, she grounded me for 2 weeks. I couldn't drive the car anymore. But that was one of my early adventures with Valley Forge. I just was awestruck by the place.
I love that. And I love that this organization is the citizen steward of the Valley Forge Parks. And so I want to talk about, of course, this is our 4th of July episode. And so a lot of conversation around 4th of July is American independence. Why is Valley Forge such an essential part of that story?
Historians have often referred to Valley Forge as the crucible, the forged an independent nation. It's where 13 separate countries came together as one united force. And they were fighting against the most powerful army in the world at that time. And it's important to note that they were separate countries. They were all colonies of Great Britain, each separate and distinct. They had their own constitutions, their own laws, their own currency. Pennsylvania was fighting Connecticut at the time over a border dispute. The thing to remember is that they were separate countries. Richard Henry Lee, by the way, at the Continental Congress, put forth a resolution that these united colonies should and ought to be free and independent states. And that was the first time that concept was introduced. The Congress went on to adopt the term United States of America. Prior to that, we were a loosely organized group of colonies and really had nothing to do with one another. In fact, if you go to Valley Forge, you'll see that all of the huts that are there are set up by states. There's the Massachusetts Brigade, the Virginia Brigade, Rhode Island. They were all separate. They were not a unified force. And it was at Valley Forge that they came together as a single unified force.
The Declaration of Independence was signed in Philadelphia in 1776, of course. But Valley Forge shows us what came after that decision. How does Valley Forge help us understand what it actually took to secure independence?
There were hardships at Valley Forge, as most people know, but I don't think they really understand how extreme those hardships were. It's all often recognized as, nothing but snow, but that's not necessarily the case. It was a winter, and as a winter, it had its moments of cold rain, snow, thawing, warmer weather, and that created conditions that were very difficult for the soldiers. The conditions at Valley Forge, if I could describe them in 3 words, were mud, smoke, and smell. The mud is just ever present. Would have been better had it been a freezing winter and the ground would remain frozen, but it wasn't. Troops were marching about, nothing but mud. I mean, it was ankle deep in some places. Smoke. The men were burning green wood for cooking, for heat. And the reason it was green wood is that, they decimated the forest, the wood all around Valley Forge. They built up to 2,000 huts, and that takes a lot of trees. So it was pretty much an open area. And they were burning the green wood that they recently cut, and that creates smoke. There was a cloud of smoke that overhung the encampment at all times. And the smell, well, nobody's bathing, and you've got 12,000 men in close quarters, nobody's bathing. Plus, there were rotting carcasses of horses and other animals. There were open latrines. They did their best to cover them, but they were open latrines, and the place smelled. One officer wrote in a journal that on his way back from visiting outside the camp, when they got to within a mile of the camp on their return, they could actually smell the place when the wind was right. And one fellow wrote to his brother in Rhode Island. He said, "We are moving to the north side of the river where the air is more fair." So those were kind of testimonials as to what the place smelled like. It was pretty bad. And I should mention that there were not just men there. There were up to 500 women in addition to the men. They were wives, mothers, children. They were not going to stay home alone because the conditions in the various states at that time was a civil war. Neighbors were fighting neighbors. I don't think many people realize that. It was a true civil war. Men were hanging one another if they disagreed. It was tough. So you could see where some of the wives would say, "If you're going, so am I. I'm not staying here alone." And they followed their husbands. But, through all of this, they persevered. They came together to sustain one another. And that's the true story of Valley Forge. It was perseverance.
Is there a specific person, soldier, civilian, woman, or lesser-known figure from Valley Forge whose story you wish more people knew?
Well, there is a young private from Connecticut by the name of Joseph Plum Martin, who many years after the encampment wrote a journal. He was with Washington and the Army throughout the war. He came from Connecticut. He marched with the Army through New York, down to New Jersey, crossed the Delaware with Washington, was at Valley Forge. He spent almost the entire war with the Army. And he wrote a memoir in the early 1800s. It's still in print. It's published in a number of titles, Yankee Doodle Dandy, or The Story of a Connecticut Soldier. But anyway, it's Joseph Plum Martin. And he has many stories in that book. One of the other stories at Valley Forge is, Washington firmly believed that we needed to maintain good relationships with the surrounding farmers. I mean, the farmers were critical to the colonies. It was the breadbasket of the colonies north of Valley Forge. And we had to maintain good relationships with them. He forbid his soldiers from stealing from the farmers, the surrounding farmers. Now, bear in mind that the soldiers were starving. They would go to these farms and they would steal. And this one particular farmer, a group of soldiers, continued to steal his chickens. And Washington, when they were captured, Washington ordered them hung as an example for disobeying his orders. Now, on the day of the hanging, he pardoned all of them except the leader of that group. And he had that leader hung as a reminder of disobeying his order not to steal from the citizenry. There was also another story where one farmer complained to General Anthony Wayne about men coming in and stealing his provisions. Wayne had a lot on his table. He had a lot of things to deal with. And this farmer continued to present his case to General Wayne. And Wayne just got frustrated at one point and said, "Look, if they continue to do that, just shoot them." And lo and behold, when they came back the next time, the farmer shot them. And that was the end of that. But there's some of the stories that went on. It wasn't, it was not a great place to live in. By the way, that the encampment, when they built all the huts, became the fourth largest city in North America, with the number of men and the huts, etc.
Valley Forge itself was not the site of a major battle, but it is remembered as a turning point in the American Revolution. What changed there?
Well, there were no battles there. You're right. However, you have to remember that Washington didn't know there would not be a battle there. He had to be prepared. And that involved for the men to dig trench works around the encampment. They built 5 what we call redoubts. They were basically earthen forts to protect the encampment. He had to be prepared for an attack. And he prepared it to such a degree that General Howe wrote in his notes. General Howe was head of the British Army in Philadelphia, since they occupied Philadelphia now. He wrote in his notes that he advised against attacking the army at Valley Forge because they were entrenched. And for that reason, they weren't attacked. Because the British attacked an entrenched army once before, early in the Revolution, a place called Bunker Hill. And although they won, they sustained severe losses. And ever since Bunker Hill, they changed their tactics and would not attack an entrenched army. And that's what Valley Forge was. And Washington prepared that place to be an entrenched army. And therefore, they did not attack. Little did Howe know, but by February, because Washington was losing almost a third of his army because of enlistments were not through for the whole war. They were just for a number of months. And enlistments were up for a good part of the army at the end of the year. Plus, there were desertions. A lot of the officers simply went home. They said, I've had enough. That, the 12,000-man army shrunk to 6,000 men in February. Now, Howe didn't know that. Had he known that, it would have been pretty easy for him to overtake that army, entrenched or not. But that's just one story. And I often ask myself, for example, if I'm a soldier at Valley Forge, I have to ask myself, why do I stay here? I mean, I've been marching so much that my shoes have worn out. I don't have any shoes. I started out with shoes, but shoes are made of leather. And, with all that marching, leather wears out. And the Army's not replacing my shoes. The commissary was in total disarray. They're not providing me with blankets to keep warm. I'm not being paid. There's certainly not enough food. I go for days with nothing but what they called fire cake, which was flour and water cooked on a hot rock. So why am I staying? And I think that you can only look to one thing for that, and that's Washington's leadership. The men admired him and were loyal to him. And even though there were many reasons to go home, George Washington said he would partake of the same hardships as his men. And they recognized that. Not only Washington, but Washington, during the encampment, it was a European tradition that the officers all went home during the winter encampment because they didn't fight in the winter. Washington encouraged his generals to stay with their men. And most of them did. Some of them went home, but most of them did. Example, Anthony Wayne, his home was just a few miles from Valley Forge. His family was there. He did not go home during the encampment. He stayed with his men. And, the men recognized that, and they were very loyal to George Washington and the generals for that reason.
And as people celebrate the 4th of July, how does Valley Forge add depth to the way we think about independence and the founding of our nation?
I think a visit to Valley Forge can open a lot of eyes. The visitor can experience some of the living conditions. There were huts. There's huts, reproduced huts at Valley Forge, which are examples of what the men lived in, 12 men per hut, 16 by 14 foot hut, 12 men. But, they weren't in there all the time. They didn't watch television or anything. They had work during the day. They were out chopping wood or foraging for food. Food was always an issue. There were a number of bake ovens that were established. And a baker from Philadelphia, Christopher Ludwig, trained a number of men to bake bread in these bake ovens. So we have a reproduced bake oven there. You can see one right around what we call Muhlenberg's Brigade, where the huts are. And at the height of the encampment, they were producing thousands of loaves of bread a day, because the men were supposed to get a pound of bread a day, and that just wasn't happening. There are redoubts or earthen forts that have been rebuilt, and you can go in one of those and see them. The main redoubt that you go into, it overlooks what would have been an army's march from Philadelphia. So you can see what the American soldiers would have seen if the British had decided to attack. And they had to be prepared for battle, and you can see all of that. Some of our huts are actually outfitted today. It's something that has occurred within the last 10 years, where you can see what an officer's hut looked like and what an enlisted man's hut looked like. There's even a hospital hut in a different location. I might mention here, and you can notice it in the huts, the Army was supposed to give the enlisted man everything he needed: his uniforms, his food, his weapons, shoes. Didn't occur, really. I mean, the commissary was in total disarray. But the officers all had to provide all their own stuff, their own uniforms, their own boots, their own horses, their own outfitting of a hut. If they needed a desk, they had to bring their own desk. They needed a bed in there, they bring their own bed. So officers had to provide all of their own needs. Officers, by the way, were that was a position that was purchased from the Congress. And at Valley Forge, Washington asked Congress to allow him to appoint officers on merit, not necessarily on wealth or position. And Congress allowed that. And Washington began to appoint the officers he felt were best in a position to lead the men. And that was new at Valley Forge. So that's just something, you can see all of that if you go to Valley Forge. A lot of effort has been put into a new visitor center at Valley Forge, very different from the old one. If you follow it in sequence, you can learn what the encampment was about, what went on in the encampment. And after you leave the visitor center, you can go out into the field and see the actual thing. It's all been preserved. The field has been preserved pretty well. There's something called the Grand Parade in the middle of the park, which is where von Steuben trained all the men. We can talk about him. I think if we want to come down to one individual that made a major difference at Valley Forge, it was Friedrich von Steuben. He was a Prussian officer. As such, he had a lot of experience. Washington recognized his ability to organize and named him Inspector General. Thing to remember about von Steuben is he didn't speak any English. He spoke French, Russian, and German. And he learned to curse in English, by the way. And the men got a kick out of that. That endeared him to the men. And von Steuben is another, he lived with the men. He did not hold himself above his position. He lived with the men and trained them. And he often said, these men all know how to fight. They know how to fight. They just don't know how to fight together. You have to remember, all of these men came from militia. And the militia were created in each one of the states, then colonies, but then became states. And they all had their own method of training. There was no uniform method of training. So when you get in the heat of battle and orders are given, not everybody's on the same page. It became chaotic. So what did our men do? The first thing they did was run. And von Steuben changed that. He said they need to fight together, and he trained them to fight together. And that occurred on what we call the Grand Parade, which is right in the center of the park. It's a large field. It was on that Grand Parade that he taught them the manual of arms, how to march, how to load their weapons and fire to the point where they can reload and fire 3, maybe 4 times in 1 minute. And that took a lot of training. And they used to practice that. Why go over the same thing day after day after day? Because it has to be muscle memory. You don't get a chance to think about all of that in the heat of battle. He taught them how to use a bayonet. Our men didn't know how to use a bayonet. They used it for a number of things. I mean, it was a big tool to cut a hole in the ground, to cook meat over a fire if they had meat. Von Steuben told him to not do that. He said that bayonet has a purpose, and he showed him the purpose. He taught him to fight with a bayonet. Bayonet was the number one weapon at that time. You know, you can get off a couple of shots as these armies are marching and converging on one another, but when they get to within a few feet of one another, it's hand to hand. And unless you know what you're doing with a bayonet, you're in big trouble, particularly against the British, who were well trained. As I said, the number one army in the world at that time. So that's one of the major stories of Valley Forge.
And Don, I have to ask, so these soldiers at Valley Forge, they really underwent hardship. I mean, nearly 2,000 soldiers died at Valley Forge. What was the mindset of people, of soldiers who came out of Valley Forge, after Valley Forge? How did Valley Forge shape their mindset?
Well, you know, Washington ordered the very sick out of camp for morale purposes. He didn't want to see the other soldiers, see the men they were friendly with dying. So he ordered them out of camp, and they established all of these field hospitals in the churches that surround Valley Forge, as far away as Ephrata, PA. But the mindset as they left, you know, somebody once said, you know, why one of the reasons the men stayed, and this is true of any army, why do you stay and fight? And you do so because of the guy next to you. You're fighting for the guy next to you. You become that close to one another. That's one of the reasons you fight. And I think the mindset leaving Valley Forge was just that. We've trained together. We fight together. And they stayed together. They supported one another, which was very important. And that was huge back then because, as I said, the men were very state conscious. Washington referred to his country as Virginia. He referred to the other soldiers from Virginia as his countrymen. So there was that mindset that the state was my country. And for them to come together with a single mindset as a United States Army was not easy. But that was Washington. You know, that's how he pulled that group together, and he got them to thinking along those lines, less as part of Virginia or Massachusetts or Rhode Island or Pennsylvania. He got them thinking in terms of a United States Army. As an example, one of the first uses of the cipher USA was on a button that was cast at Valley Forge. In fact, some of the casts have been found in archaeology there. It's a button with the cipher USA on it. And the men started to replace their individual state buttons with the Unified Army button, USA. Now, we don't know if that was for the United States Army or the United States of America, but it was a step toward unification. And by the way, that concept of being part of the state before you're part of the larger United States, that existed and continued right up to the Civil War. In fact, prior to the Civil War, proper English was "these United States are." After the Civil War, "this United States is." So, you know, that persisted for a long time, the state versus the United States. But that's what Washington had to deal with. These were 13 separate armies that he inherited. And he, with von Steuben, turned them into a single United States Army. We refer to Valley Forge as the birthplace of the American Army. You know, it was conceived as a concept. It was conceived in Philadelphia, but it was born as an army at Valley Forge. It was birthed at Valley Forge. So, yeah, that was kind of the mindset, to answer your question, that they were all part of a single unit, that they were brought together as a single unit. which was a different mindset.
And turning to the park today, how does the Valley Forge Park Alliance support the mission and keep its history alive?
The mission of the Valley Forge Park Alliance itself is to inspire appreciation for and citizen stewardship of Valley Forge Park. And we have been around for 50 years. In 1976, we were created as a nonprofit called the Friends of Valley Forge. And actually, that is still our legal name. So we work hand in hand with the National Park Service staff, which has changed very much over the years, over all of those many years. And we help them fulfill their mission. Valley Forge exists as a national park for 3 reasons. One of them is the history of Washington's encampment, which you have just heard about from Don. But there are 2 other reasons as well. And the second reason is to preserve the natural resources. Valley Forge Park is the largest green space in southeastern Pennsylvania. It's 3,500 acres, 35 miles of trails, a river, a stream, tremendous wildlife and biodiversity. So that's a big part of what we're protecting at Valley Forge, in addition to the story of the encampment. And then the third reason it's a national park is not because the federal government said, oh, we need this, we need this to be a park, or, we need to take over this state park. It was really through citizen stewardship. So at the time of the centennial, a Civil War nurse named Anna Morris Holstein said, we really need to save George Washington's headquarters. So the building, the Isaac Potts House that had served as Washington's headquarters, wasn't preserved in any way. And so she, along with a group of women, raised money to save George Washington's headquarters. And that was the start of Valley Forge Park. It was just a couple acres. And some years later, it became Pennsylvania's first state park. And then in 1976, the state gave Valley Forge, which is much bigger at that point, to the people of the nation. And so it's that citizen stewardship that we are the descendants of. So we're continuing that tradition. And many, maybe most national parks have friends groups that work hand in hand with the federal government staff in that place to help them with their mission and to do the things that the federal government can't do in that place.
I think it's important to note that we are not part of the federal government. The Valley Forge Park Alliance is a separate and independent charity. It's a corporation, a separate corporation that qualifies as a 501c3 charity and always has had that designation. We have a partnership agreement with Valley Forge Park. We are not funded by the federal government. We're not funded by the park, but we're a partner to the park, as Molly said, to help them fulfill the mission that they have set out for Valley Forge Park. And we try to maintain that independence because we can do things, as Molly said, that the park can't do for itself, like ask for money. The park's not allowed to do that, but we can.
Mm-hmm. And most of our funding, we have been largely volunteer run for our entire history. And I'm a full-time staff person, but for the most part, we are still volunteer run. And we have been funded by members and donors and grants like the America 250 PA grant. Thank you all very much. And we do consider state government, local government as part of our outreach in terms of citizen stewardship.
And what are some of the programs, projects, or preservation efforts that the Alliance is most focused on right now?
Well, right now, we are most focused on the restoration and adaptive reuse of a historic farmhouse that actually sits in the Grand Parade that Don mentioned. It's a project that, when finished, will be our home in the park. We're the community outreach for the park, but we have never had a physical presence in the park. So we're really excited to move into this building which the restoration has been a partnership with the National Park Service. So we have done a capital campaign. We've raised over $1 million from private donors for our part of the restoration of this building. It's a historic farmhouse from 1816. And what we're doing to it is we're adding an accessible restroom, we're adding deck space. We have a sublease with a cafe operator. So we'll be providing refreshments in the park. It will be an event space. And so in some ways, it's something that will boost our capacity because we'll have some revenue from this, the operations that we'll have in this building. And for us, that's so important because we'll be able to grow. And there are over 100 historic structures in Valley Forge Park that are vacant, that are in need of restoration, that the park wants them to be in use and probably leased privately because it's just a model that's been working for the Park Service, just to provide revenue and just this greater sense of public-private partnerships. So once we move into this house, we will have some more revenue, and then we aim to help the park with the other buildings that it would like to put back into use. So that's one of the things, and that's really the main thing that we're doing. And we're actually hosting a very large July 4th event outside the house. The house is still under construction, but we're hosting a big part of Valley Forge's July 3rd through 5th celebration. And one of the main things that we'll be doing is hosting readings of the Declaration of Independence throughout the day. There's a lot going on in Valley Forge that weekend, and all that information is available on our website and on the park's website. And after July 4th, as I say, we'll get on with everything else that we've been up to. And one of those things is to provide more programming in the park. And we have recently received a grant through the National Trust for Historic Preservation to do interpretive walks led by volunteers in the Grand Parade. And so we'll be telling the story of not just von Steuben's training of the Army in the Grand Parade, but of this tremendous space over time. Before George Washington was there, Indigenous people stewarded the land for 20,000 years. It was farmland. It was actually industrial land that became a Superfund site at some point and was cleaned up in the 1990s. It's now the largest contiguous warm grass meadow in eastern Pennsylvania. Tremendous biodiversity. So we'll be telling that story of the transformation of that landscape over the years. So we do a lot of other programming as well. Much of it has been very history focused and continues to be. We maintain the Valley Forge Muster Roll, which is a database of almost 30,000 soldiers and other people who were at Valley Forge during the encampment. And in many ways, we support the park. In many ways, we advocate for the park. It's a hard time for the National Park Service generally. And we're stepping in to do the things that need to be done for Valley Forge to remain this vibrant, inviting place for visitors from near and far.
You told me something right before the start of this episode that July 4th means something a little bit different to Valley Forge. Can you talk about this a little bit?
Sure. Our celebration at Valley Forge, we've been calling it 50-250. So we all know what 250 means. Although Valley Forge's 250th really isn't until December 1777. So what we're mostly celebrating at Valley Forge is its 50 years as a national park. So on July 4th, 1976, Gerald Ford came to Valley Forge and signed it into being as a national park. So of the 400-something national park units that exist today, Valley Forge is the only one born on the 4th of July. So we are celebrating that. And as part of that, we are sending a very big thank you to the state of Pennsylvania for giving our country its first state park. And so earlier this month, a few members of the Valley Forge Park Alliance and the Valley Forge National Historical Park staff had the opportunity to visit Harrisburg. And we were really honored to be recognized on both the Senate floor and the House floor. There was a House resolution that was introduced by Tim Briggs and also supported by Mary Jo Daley, Joe Webster, and Melissa Schusterman. That House Resolution 488 names July 4th, 2026 officially as Valley Forge National Historical Park Day in Pennsylvania. So we're really excited about that. And on the Senate floor, Senators Comita and Capoletti gave us a citation recognizing Valley Forge as well. So it's interesting. It's not just the 250th of the nation at Valley Forge. It is this really big celebration of 50 years as a national park, and sending a very big thank you to the state of Pennsylvania for that.
I think that's so incredible that you have 3 celebrations in one. So finally, Molly and Don, on this 250th anniversary of American independence, on this July 4th, what do you hope people carry with them from the story of Valley Forge?
Well, for me, I think about community outreach and citizen stewardship. And one of the things that we've been promoting for a while now is we've been asking people to share their Valley Forge story. And we have gotten an incredible response. There are lots of folks who remember July 4th, 1976. They remember the Conestoga wagon train. They have sent us photos. It's really been incredible. All the memories that people have, not just from 1976, but from the many years of Valley Forge, whether it was a state park or a national park. And what we're hoping to do is to create more memories for people who come to Valley Forge this year on July 4th. And we're hoping that we can create memories that then they'll be sharing come the 300th anniversary of the country.
Molly and Don, thank you so much, both of you, for joining us today and for helping us better understand Valley Forge, not just as a historic place, but as a living reminder of what independence required and why these stories still matter today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
On this 4th of July, as Pennsylvania and the nation mark 250 years of American independence, Valley Forge stands as a powerful testament to the founding of the United States. Because the promise written in the Declaration of Independence, the promise of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, did not live only on parchment. It lived in the people who carried it forward, in the soldiers who endured, in the families who sacrificed, and the bold leaders who knew that the fight was worth it, and in a cause that had every reason to fail, but did not. Valley Forge reminds us that independence was not inevitable. It was chosen, it was fought for, it was tested, and it was kept alive by people who believed in something bigger than themselves. To our listeners, thank you for joining us for this very special 4th of July episode. We hope today's conversation inspires you to visit Valley Forge, learn more about the Valley Forge Park Alliance, and take a moment this 4th of July to reflect on the Pennsylvania stories that shape the very foundation of our nation. Here at America 250 PA, we are wishing you a very happy 4th of July and a historic 250th anniversary. As we celebrate, let us remember the Pennsylvanians, the Pennsylvania towns and counties, and, of course, the Pennsylvania stories that carried America forward. This 4th of July, stay PA proud.
Hi, everyone. I'm Cassandra Coleman, Executive Director of America 250 PA. Thank you so much for listening to today's podcast. We encourage you to learn more about America 250 PA and send us your podcast ideas at america250pa.org.
This has been the America 250 PA Start Here, America Did podcast, produced by Commonwealth Media Services. Stay tuned for more epic Pennsylvania stories at america250pa.org.